A dog refused to enter the barn for weeks, and when the veteran owner finally looked beneath the floor, he uncovered a hidden cage. The town's trusted feed store owner, Caleb Whitaker, had been hiding something far more disturbing than bad debt. But Jack Monroe, a man trained to spot quiet danger, made one decision that turned the entire scheme on its head. And just wait until you hear how this quiet veteran brought a secret empire crashing down, and why justice, in the end, didn't need to shout to be heard.
Jack Monroe didn't come to the edge of Miller County looking for anything new. He came for silence, for stillness, for space that didn't ask questions. The farm he bought was 30 acres of rundown fencing, tall grass, and one barn that had seen better decades. It sat crooked on the land like it was leaning in to listen. The porch steps creaked even when the wind was still, and the mailbox had rusted shut years before he arrived. That was fine by Jack. After 2 tours and a retirement wrapped in quiet ceremony and louder memories, he wasn't in the mood for visitors anyway. He brought with him one constant, a 5-year-old shepherd mix named Scout, the kind of dog that didn't bark without cause, didn't startle easy, and slept with one ear turned toward the door no matter how tired he was. They had been through a lot together, states, seasons, and sleepless nights, and Scout had a way of knowing things Jack hadn't said aloud. Not magic, just attention. The same kind Jack had lived by for years, reading rooms, tracking shifts in mood or air pressure. It was a shared language made of silences. Jack's plan was simple. Mornings would start with coffee on the porch, followed by fence repairs, brush clearing, and small victories, fixing a hinge, patching a leak, teaching his hands to do some other than tighten into fists when they weren't holding a weapon. The barn was meant to be his main project. The frame was sound, the roof only half leaky, and with a bit of work it could be turned into a decent workshop or a quiet place to think. But from the first morning on the property, Scout refused to step inside. At first, Jack thought nothing of it. New smells, old wood, unfamiliar shadows. Dogs get cautious. He called Scout over with a calm voice, tossed his favorite rubber ball inside, even opened a can of chicken to bait him. Scout approached the barn door, nose twitching, tail low but not tucked. He set one paw across the threshold, just one, and then stopped cold, shoulder stiff, head down. Then came a low, uneasy whine, not fear, not resistance, but something close to warning. His eyes weren't on the loft or the walls or the corners where rats might skitter. He was staring at the floor. Not long, just a few seconds. Then Scout backed away, planted himself behind Jack's leg, and didn't budge. Jack chalked it up to nerves, a new place after all. He gave it time, tried again the next day, and the next. The behavior didn't change. Scout would follow Jack anywhere else on the property, down into the tree line, across the stream, even up on the old tractor bed to sit beside him while he worked. But when they reached the barn, the dog stopped short like he'd found an invisible line he wouldn't cross. Sometimes he'd sit at the threshold, ears up, body tense, nose working the air like it was reading a story Jack couldn't see. Other times he'd retreat entirely, watching from the yard with narrowed eyes. After a week, Jack started noticing things. Not big things, just little inconsistencies, what veterans sometimes call off-pattern. The barn had a smell, not strong, not fresh, just wrong. A faint chemical trace, sharp and clean, the kind you don't expect in a place filled with old wood and hay. He noticed it came strongest from the far right corner near the feed room. He saw the floorboards too. Most of them were old, dusty, scuffed by years of boots and hooves. But just near that corner, 5 or 6 boards looked newer, lighter wood, different brain. Screws that still shone silver instead of the dull orange-brown of the older ones. As if someone had repaired a small section recently, but in a way that tried too hard not to stand out. There was sawdust too, a fine sprinkle under the feed bin, not blown or tracked like it should have been. It was the kind that fell straight down and stayed there, settling on a floor that hadn't been disturbed in weeks. Jack didn't panic. That wasn't his way. He told himself it was probably Earl Bracken, the last man who owned the farm. Rumor was Earl had lost everything after a harsh winter, packed up in a hurry, and left the place barely above code. Maybe he'd done a quick patch job on the floor before he left. Maybe he spilled something he didn't want to smell. People take shortcuts when they're desperate. Jack knew that better than most. But still, Scout wouldn't go in, and that meant something. Neighbors began to drop by. Miller County wasn't big, and newcomers were rare enough to draw polite curiosity. Caleb Whitaker came first, a man in his 50s with a warm laugh and a feed store down in town. He brought Jack a sack of cornmeal as a welcome and mentioned casually that he'd helped Earl with a few repairs on the barn back in the day. Said he could get Jack a good deal on some lumber if needed. Then there was Deputy Maya Collins. She stopped by on patrol, parked her cruiser near the fence line, and chatted from the driver's seat like she wasn't on duty. She scratched Scout behind the ears and grinned when he didn't react. "What's the verdict, Inspector?" she joked, peering at the barn. "Found a ghost in there or just something smelly?" Scout stepped back and bumped into Jack's knee, not hard, but firmly, like a nudge to say, "Don't laugh, pay attention." Collins noticed the movement and tilted her head. The joke didn't land. The moment passed. Jack said little, just nodded, took the lumber deal, let the conversation drift. But that night, when the sun dropped behind a ridge and the trees stood in silhouette, he found himself walking slow circles around the barn. Not working, not planning, just circling, listening, watching. He checked the hasp on the door twice, though he already knew it was locked. He paused at the base where the boards met the soil and looked for tracks. None. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in hunches either, not the Hollywood kind. But he believed in Scout. And if a dog like that said no, day after day, without fear or excitement, just quiet refusal, then some part of Jack, the part that had stayed alive overseas, said, "Don't force it, just listen." He didn't go back in the barn the next day. He waited, and Scout waited with him. The storm didn't sneak up on them. It announced itself, rolling in from the west in slow, deliberate waves. The clouds that day looked unnatural, swollen and bruised, sagging low over the treetops like something about to break open. The sycamores behind the barn swayed harder than usual, and the wind made the grass lean one way, as if nature itself was pointing at something Jack hadn't yet seen. By dusk, the sky was a blackened canvas streaked with electricity. The kind of storm that doesn't just rattle windows, but presses down on your chest like it wants something from you. Jack stood on the porch, coffee gone cold in his hand, watching the horizon crackle with distant light. Scout had been pacing all afternoon, low circles near the front steps, stopping every few minutes to stare at the barn like he expected it to move. He hadn't barked, hadn't growled, just paced, waiting, clocking something Jack couldn't hear. Then the lightning hit, clean and sharp, outlining the ridge line in a burst of ghost white. Scout snapped upright. His entire frame stiffened like he'd been pulled by a wire, and then he barked. But this wasn't a warning. This wasn't the usual alarm dog noise. This was something else. It was short, deep, forceful. Command. Jack's pulse jumped. Something shifted in him, the same instinct he hadn't needed in years. Move now, assess later. He grabbed his flashlight from the hook by the door, phone from the table, and crossed the yard fast, Scout pressed tight to his side like a shadow with breath. Rain was just beginning to fall, fine needles blown sideways by the wind. As Jack approached the barn, the storm lit the ground behind it in a flash, and that's when he saw the door. Wide open, swinging gently. It had been locked. He knew it had. He'd checked the hasp that morning. Now, the padlock dangled uselessly on its loop, twisted and warped like someone had hit it with force. The hasp itself was bent, the screws loosened from the wood.
not worn by time, broken. Then came the second sound, faint, from inside. A sharp, erratic scratching, quick and desperate, like claws on wood. Not from the hayloft, not from the stalls, from beneath. Scout growled low, his hackles fully up. He crept forward until his paws hit the threshold, then stopped, whined, and nudged Jack's thigh hard, not with fear this time, but urgency, a direction. Toward the feed room. Jack moved. The wind howled overhead as the rain started pounding in earnest. The beam from his flashlight danced across the walls, catching old nails, a hanging rake, dust. Then it landed on the place Scout had stared at for weeks, the patch of floor with newer boards, the ones with screws that didn't match. He dropped to one knee, eyes scanning. There. A faint groove in the plank nearest the corner. At first glance, it looked like part of the wood grain, but up close, he saw it. A recessed metal ring, tucked into a knot in the board. Hidden, not by accident. Jack wedged his fingers in, braced his boot, and pulled. The board came up slowly, reluctant from time and tension. Then it gave. And something breathed from below. Not air from a cellar, not wind. This was different. Cool, sour, damp in a way that suggested confinement. The kind of air that didn't move on its own. He aimed the flashlight into the opening. What he saw made the world tilt. It was a crawl space, boxed in, barely 3 feet deep. The lumber was newer, cleaner, freshly cut, nailed together with the precision of someone who had done this before. Tape, industrial grade, gray and fraying at the edges, lined the seams, not to seal heat, to trap smell. Inside sat a metal water bowl, dented and smeared, half full. Beside it, a plastic food dish with dry kibble untouched. A short length of thick chain, bolted to a support beam. A wool blanket, folded, or it had been once, now bunched and stained by moisture. The flashlight caught the glint of metal in the far corner. A baby monitor, plugged into nothing. But the little green light on its front glowed steady, active, recording. Jack stared. Then the bowl trembled. No, something beneath the bowl trembled. The chain pulled taut with a quiet clink. And from the darkest corner, a shape moved forward, slowly. A dog. Not Scout. A different one. Shorter, heavier in the chest. Her fur was a muted gray, mottled by stress and lack of sunlight. Her ribs were visible, the outline of every breath rising like soft shadows under the skin. Her snout was covered by a soft muzzle, intended to prevent barking more than biting, but it had rubbed the fur thin around her mouth. She didn't flinch from the light. She didn't growl. She just stared. And something in her eyes told Jack she had long ago stopped expecting rescue. Then she saw Scout. And made a sound. Not a bark, not even a whimper. It was more like a choked gasp, something between recognition and plea. Scout jumped forward instantly, placing himself between Jack and the opening, ears pinned back, body trembling, not in fear, but something else. Contained panic, protective instinct. Jack knew that body language. This wasn't stranger danger. This was wrongness. This was, don't let him touch it, don't let him see. Jack's first thought was pure and clear, get her out. But his second came colder and sharper. The water's fresh. Someone had been here. Recently. Too recently. The baby monitor blinked again. Jack's breath caught. His thumb killed the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room, except for that tiny pinprick of green. He slid the board back into place, slow and careful, then stood. Scout was at his heel, staring at the door. The rain hit hard as they stepped outside, both of them soaked within seconds. Jack took out his phone and hit the contact labeled Deputy Collins. It rang once. "Jack?" Maya's voice crackled through. "Storm's just getting here. Everything all right out there?" "No," he said, voice low. "Maya, there's a dog, chained, under the floor of my barn." Silence. Then, "I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, her cruiser lights splashed the yard in red and blue. Scout met her at the driveway. Jack led her straight to the feed room. He didn't speak much, just opened the floor again, careful not to touch anything more than necessary. They both crouched beside it. She leaned in and let out a breath. And then she froze. "There," she said. Where the chain ran through the joist, just above the level of the crawl space, something tiny gleamed in the beam of her flashlight. Almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A lens. Small, clean, new. No wider than a shirt button. Jack leaned closer. A pinhole camera. The baby monitor wasn't for the dog. It was for whoever came back.
Deputy Collins stayed long enough to document the crawl space, collect the feed bowls, photograph the blanket, mark the camera's location, and call in animal control. She used gloves. She worked quietly, but her face didn't hide much. "This isn't someone just being careless," she said to Jack softly as rain tapped the roof. "This was built, measured, meant to last." Jack only nodded. His hand rested on Scout's head, grounding them both. Collins stood to leave, raincoat slicked, radio crackling at her shoulder. Before she turned back toward her cruiser, she looked Jack dead in the eye. "You found the camera," she said. "That means someone's watching, so I need you to keep clear. You understand me?" He said he did. And then he didn't. Jack had seen this kind of structure before, not barns, networks. He'd seen operations that were quiet and clean on the outside, with a smile in the front and a sickness hidden behind drywall. Overseas, that kind of evil often wore uniforms or waved flags. Here, it wore baseball caps and sold bulk feed with a handshake. The shape was different, the intention wasn't. As soon as Collins left the property, Jack sat at his workbench and began cataloging every detail that had felt wrong. The screws in the floor, too new, too uniform. He remembered the markings on the heads, tiny initials, CW, a custom batch sold by only one store in the county, Whitaker's Feed. The bleach, he had smelled it weeks ago, faint but out of place. A high-grade commercial mix, also sold at Whitaker's. The food bowl? A local brand, stocked in the small plastic bin at the register, the kind offered as a last-minute upsell with every 40-pound bag of dry feed. The baby monitor. He found the exact model on Whitaker's website, listed under calving supplies. Originally designed to monitor livestock in labor, but it worked just fine for something else. Jack leaned back, hands folded, and stared out at the barn. Scout lay across his boots, ears twitching at each crack of thunder in the distance. The storm hadn't passed completely. It hovered now, uneasy, like it was waiting. Jack's mind wasn't on the weather. It was on motive. He had spent years being trained to think about infrastructure, how things move, who profits, what hides beneath systems built to look ordinary. Nothing in that crawl space had been random. Someone had cut those boards with care. Someone had planned the ventilation, the soundproofing, even the placement of the chain. This wasn't the work of a teenager or a reckless squatter. This was someone local, someone practiced, someone who knew how to keep attention off the things that mattered. The kind of person who might drop off free bags of brain at the senior center while telling stories about rescue dogs in adoption vans and full shelters. The kind who always had an explanation, always had the right tone of concern. The kind who could smile at you from across a church pew and build a prison under your floor. By the time night fully settled, Jack hadn't moved from the porch. The coffee had gone cold hours ago. Scout remained on his boots, his breathing steady but alert. The barn sat in silhouette, darker now than before. Jack didn't light the lantern. He didn't need to. His eyes stayed locked on the path from the road, because someone would come back. Not out of curiosity, out of routine. You don't hide something unless you intend to return to it.
Around midnight, he heard the tires. A soft hiss as rubber met wet gravel. No headlights. Just the roll of a slow vehicle easing down the drive like it belonged there. Jack didn't move until the engine cut. Then he rose, stepped down the porch without sound, and melted into the shadows of the yard. Scout staying behind, that had been their quiet agreement. One bark would be enough if things went wrong. The driver's door opened. A figure stepped out. A flashlight flicked on. Tight beam, professional grip. The person moved with confidence, not hesitation. Toward the barn. Jack followed. He gave it 10 seconds, long enough for the figure to step inside, not long enough to get to the floor. Then he stepped forward. His boots struck wet boards, solid and sharp. The flashlight whipped toward the sound. Jack raised his own light and caught the face clean. Caleb Whitaker, owner of Whitaker's Feed, former town council chair, sponsor of the Miller County Little League. He froze where the barn boards met the threshold, caught between the rain and the wreckage. Water beaded on the bill of his cap, and his expression danced between surprise and calculation. "Jack," he said, trying for the easy voice he used at barbecues. "Heard the storm rolling back through. Thought I'd check the roof for you. That old tent up there likes to shift." Jack didn't speak. His flashlight moved lower. In Caleb's hand was a pry bar, rusted but ready. Over his shoulder, a canvas feed bag, sagging with weight. The shape inside, hard to mistake. Kibble. Jack's voice came low and level. "You own the screws, Caleb." A pause. Jack stepped closer. "You sell the bleach, the bowl, the baby monitor, all of it." Another pause. Caleb's jaw worked. Then he nodded, slow and heavy, as if admitting gravity. "It's not what you think," he said, dropping his voice to something that mimicked sincerity. "It's not that bad. Look, I know how it seems." "It never is what I think," Jack replied quietly. "Say it anyway." Caleb exhaled, the sigh of a man who believed honesty might save him, or at least buy him time. He began to speak, each word carefully chosen. He said it was temporary. He said he was holding dogs pulled from bad situations, that he was working with rescues up north, that he was just waiting for the next van, for more space. Said the shelters were jammed up, that no one else had room. He said he kept them dry. He fed them. He said he stepped up. He said it was the humane thing to do. Jack listened, not out of belief, but out of discipline. He let the lie finish wearing its coat. Because it wasn't what Caleb said. It was why he said it. He wasn't explaining. He was rehearsing. How many times had he used that story? How many people had nodded and gone home, thinking they'd heard the full truth? Jack looked past Caleb and saw the gray dog again. In his mind, curled in the dark beneath the floor, the raw skin around her snout, the stillness in her bones. Not panicked, not hopeful, just resigned. Not abandoned, stored. And that was what cracked something open inside him. "You're going to back away from the door," Jack said evenly, "and you're going to set the pry bar down." Caleb's eyes flicked to the floor, then to the camera, still taped over from earlier. A storm rolled low above them. Jack saw the decision being made before it moved. Small, ugly. Caleb tightened his grip on the pry bar and swung. He was still telling himself a story, still pretending he could make this go away. But Jack wasn't here to negotiate anymore.
Training, in the end, is about choices made before adrenaline. It's what keeps your hands steady when your heart speeds up. What keeps your breath slow when instinct wants to shout. When Caleb Whitaker swung the pry bar, Jack didn't flinch. He stepped into the arc, not away from it, slipping just under the strike line. His hand closed around Caleb's wrist, pressure at the right angle, the one that turned strength into surrender, and twisted. The bar clattered to the ground with a dull metallic thud, absorbed by the old wood like the barn itself didn't want to hear it. Caleb tried to pivot, reaching for the feed bag over his shoulder. Jack didn't need to speak. Scout moved on command. Not with teeth, not with violence, but with precision. He launched forward from the dark like a shot loosed from a bow, shoulder first, striking Caleb square in the side.
The force sent him stumbling into the frame of the open barn door, head thudding softly against the post. The feed bag hit the floor and burst open. But it wasn't filled with kibble. The contents spilled out in a slow, damning slide. Collars. Leather, nylon, chain-linked. Some worn soft by use, others cracked and stained. Some bore names, Buddy, Roxy, Tanner, pressed into brass tags. Others were marked only by numbers. Every one of them had been around a neck. Jack stared for a breath too long. Then came another sound, bootsteps, hard, fast, coming from the far side of the barn, through the opposite door Jack hadn't secured. Another figure burst into view, Leon Mercer. He wasn't dressed like a rescuer. He wasn't dressed like someone who expected to be seen. His face twisted when he spotted Jack. "Grab the lens," he barked. "Get the dog, get the—" Jack didn't let him finish. He scooped the fallen prybar from the floor and hurled it, not at Leon, but past him, letting the motion steal his attention just long enough. As Leon's eyes followed the blur of metal across the barn, Jack closed the distance with a single step and drove forward with the most reliable weapon he had left. His weight. They hit the stall gate hard. It cracked open, and they went down into old straw and dust. Leon scrambled, but Jack moved faster, using leverage instead of force, memory instead of rage. His forearm came down across Leon's neck, not enough to harm, just enough to hold. Leon gasped, legs kicking, fists flailing for a grip that wasn't there. But Jack had been here before. Not in this barn, not in this body, but in this moment, where chaos begged you to react and training reminded you to the side. "You need to stop," Jack said, low and final. "Right now." Leon didn't move again. Then the barn changed. The blue-red wash of light spilled through the main entrance, bending shadows into sharp, cold edges. "Sheriff's office," Deputy Collins's voice rang out with command that didn't waver. "Hands where I can see them." Jack released his grip and raised both palms slowly. Scout, still near the door, froze mid-step at Jack's whispered word. His entire body trembled with restrained energy, but he obeyed. Deputy Collins entered first, sidearm raised, her partner behind her with the red dot of a taser locked on Caleb's center mass. Both men froze. And for a beat, no one spoke. Then, from underneath the boards, a sound. It floated upward, gentle and broken. A yip. Muffled, hoarse, familiar. Not fear, recognition. The kind of sound a captive makes when the air shifts and hope becomes real. Animal control arrived soon after. Jack stood off to the side. Scout pressed close as the crew gently removed the boards and lowered a blanket-lined crate into the crawlspace. The gray pit mix, smaller now in the open air than she had seemed in the shadows, stepped forward slowly. Each paw tested the floor like it might disappear. She squinted against the light, flinched at the sound of boots, but didn't retreat. She looked up once, saw Scout, saw Jack, and walked out on her own. Scout didn't move. She sniffed him once. He stood still. Then she licked his muzzle, soft and brief, and turned to Jack. He knelt. She sniffed his hand, then placed her chin against it, like a silent offering. Then she curled behind his leg and stayed. Collins, standing just behind them, saw the exchange. Her hand loosened around the leash she held and passed it to Jack without a word. The investigation didn't stop there. The barn gave up more secrets. The collars, they matched missing pet reports from 3 counties. The initials, the colors, the tags. Some were traced through vet records, others through grainy flyers still taped to feed store windows. The baby monitor camera, it had streamed to a mobile app registered under a burner email. That account was linked none other than Leon Mercer, whose phone history showed searches for fight schedules and cash-only events across state lines. The worst came from the dogs already rescued. Puncture scars, filed down teeth, heavy calluses on their legs. None of them recent, but none accidental either. These weren't street strays or abandoned hunting dogs. These were dogs used, discarded, and hidden. As for motive, it wasn't complicated. Caleb Whitaker, Mr. Feed Store, Mr. Little League, Mr. Community Raffle Donor, wasn't cruel in the way cartoons paint villains. He was desperate in the way real people fall. The books at his store hadn't balanced for over a year. He owed more than he could pay, and someone in a sharper truck and nicer boots had offered him a way out. All he had to do was say yes. He told himself he was rehabbing, that he was just holding them until transport, that this wasn't what it looked like. But the cameras were real. The chain was real. The sound the gray dog had made when the door opened, that was real too. Leon said nothing, even when cuffed, just stared ahead like he'd already detached from consequence. Caleb kept talking. He told Collins over and over that he meant well, that these were hard dogs, that people wouldn't take them if he didn't. But the math didn't lie. Neither did the bruised floorboards under Jack's boots. And neither did the truth Jack had seen too many times in other uniforms, under other skies. Cruelty doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers behind a smile. Jack stood beside the patrol cars long after the sirens left. Scout at one heel, the gray dog, who hadn't yet been given a name, at the other. He let the anger in, not the kind that screams, the kind that sits, heavy, hot, quiet. It was the anger of a man who had seen rules bent to protect the comfortable while the voiceless were hidden under floorboards. It reminded him of war, not the battles, but the aftermath, the things people tolerated, the justifications they built. It reminded him that evil doesn't always come in loud acts. Sometimes it arrives in silence, hidden in familiar faces. And when you find it, you don't look away.
By Friday morning, the barn was taped off, and the crawl space, once hidden under mismatched boards and quiet lies, was empty. No more chain, no more bowls, no more cameras. Just the smell of damp wood and air that was finally beginning to move. The property, once purchased for its silence, now hummed with quiet purpose. Crime scene investigators came and went, boots thudding across the floor that Scout had refused to touch. A deputy from another county photographed each nail. Someone from animal control cataloged the collars, tagging them with numbers, dates, and, where possible, names. The barn had become evidence. Jack stood outside, leaning against the porch rail as the last cruiser pulled away. The wind pushed faint ripples through the tall grass, and behind him, through the kitchen door left ajar, came the soft rhythm of two dogs breathing. Scout lay just inside, body stretched toward the threshold. Not guarding, just watching. Still. Present. And beside him, curled in a loose, exhausted coil, was the gray pit mix Deputy Collins had started calling June. "She needs a name," she had said, shrugging. "Everything on paper needs a name. May as well give her one that has a little hope in it." June had slept nearly 12 hours straight after being freed. No pacing, no barking, no movement at all, except the subtle rise and fall of a chest relearning peace. Jack laid an old quilt across the tile floor and kept the room quiet. Scout didn't leave her side. He just turned himself to face the door, every muscle relaxed except his ears. Over the next few days, Jack started making phone calls. Not to news crews, not to lawyers, to people who worked in the quiet corners of compassion. He called a rescue center in Louisville, reputable, funded, discreet. He called a friend from his service days who now trained therapy and canine dogs with nothing more than positive reinforcement and patience. And he called Pete Warner, a local carpenter who worked mostly on barns, churches, and porches. Someone who understood old wood and didn't ask too many questions. Jack didn't want the barn to be restored. He wanted it to be rebuilt, not just with lumber and nails, but with intention. His goal had changed. It was never just about making the barn safe. Now it was about making it honest. He tore up the floorboards by hand, one by one, cutting through the screws he once thought were just poorly chosen. Underneath, he ripped out the joists where the chain had been fastened. Each piece of wood, scarred, stained, holding too much silence. He carried the boards out back and stacked them with care. Later, he would burn them, not for revenge, but as a way of removing something from the earth that should never have been hidden beneath it. In the following weeks, the space transformed. He opened the double doors every morning, letting sunlight crawl across the floor until there were no corners left untouched. He scrubbed the walls, aired out the rafters, and let the wind take whatever remnants of bleach still lingered. Then came the mats, thick rubber, easy to clean, easy on paws. Then the shelves, one for treats, one for toys, and one for leashes. Real ones. Not rope, not chain. Each one labeled with a name, not a number. June, Poppy, Duke, Lady, Tess. Jack didn't speak much when people stopped by, curious about the changes. He didn't post flyers or ask for help. He just kept working. Word got around anyway. Because towns talk, and Miller County was no exception. Some neighbors said they always suspected something about Caleb Whitaker, that he had a temper, that he kept to himself too much. Others defended him, saying he gave out feed discounts, donated to school raffles, bought Girl Scout cookies from every kid who knocked. Collins didn't engage either way. She let the charges speak. Conspiracy, animal cruelty, illegal wagering, property damage. When Caleb's lawyer tried to argue good intentions, Collins quietly slid a thumb drive across the table in court. Inside, timestamps, betting logs, camera feeds. Intentions didn't matter next to facts, and the court chose the evidence over the smile. Of all the transformations that took place that month, the hardest came from the one creature who had never asked for answers, only honesty. Scout. The first time Jack asked him to step back into the barn, the dog stopped just at the edge. Even with the new mats, even with the windows open and the sun pouring in. His paws slipped once. His body trembled, not from fear, but memory, the kind that lingers even when the threat is gone. Jack didn't call him in. He crouched beside him, silent, and let Scout sniff the ground. The exact spot where the boards had once covered June's prison. The air no longer held the same weight. The rot had been cleared, the lies peeled back. Scout pressed his head against Jack's shoulder, just once. Then exhaled. The kind of exhale that doesn't just release breath, it releases a choice. He stepped forward, one paw, then the other. Behind him, June followed. She crossed the threshold and, without hesitation, flopped into the square of sunlight by the east window and stretched until every joint settled into the warmth. Then she sighed. That sound filled the entire barn. And that was the true ending. No court speech, no headlines, no victory photo. Just a man, a dog, a second chance, and a space that had once hidden harm, now being used for healing. Jack never forgave Caleb. Forgiveness wasn't in his nature, but he did accept something else, something better. The relief that comes not from punishment, but from reclamation. The knowledge that every day you open the door, sweep the floor, or teach a dog to trust your hand again, you are turning damage into dignity. He taught June her name, taught her to sit, to come when called, to accept affection near her muzzle without fear. And more importantly, he learned to recognize the moments when training wasn't the answer, when what a creature needed most was time, presence, and a space where nothing was hidden. Jack kept the barn doors open, even on stormy days, even when he didn't expect company, because light should always have a way in. And sometimes, when the cicadas lifted their chorus in the evenings and the barn roof ticked as it cooled from a hot day, Jack would glance over and catch Scout watching the floor, not with suspicion, not with fear, but with calm. And if Scout ever chose not to walk in again, Jack would listen. But most days, Scout entered without hesitation, because the world beneath his feet had been changed enough to deserve him. That was the victory. Not loud, not cinematic, but real. and the only thing hidden under the floorboards now was nothing. Just peace, and the sound of two dogs sleeping under a clean roof.